Welcome. Do you know which method of achieving an altered state of consciousness you most prefer when you are doing your magical workings or spell work or rituals? Or maybe you didn't even know there were different ways to achieve an altered state of consciousness. So, to isolation, from breath control to other methods of achieving this altered state, we're going to talk about all this and more. It's going to be a very powerful way to lend that extra oomph to your magic. So I'm Aislin, this is Ask Aislin, and I am here tonight talking about altered states of consciousness. So if you're with me live, it's great to see you here. If you've got any questions or comments, drop them in the chat and I will get to those at the end. So last week we talked about the magical mind. We talked about different theories of how the mind comes together and is divided into different pieces. As a quick review, or for those who didn't miss it or did miss it last week, there are different systems that divide our mind, our psyches, into different parts that do different functions, that serve different functions. So we talked about two different systems, the psychodynamic system, which breaks the mind into the conscious, unconscious, and the subconscious minds. And then we also talked about a more modern approach to the system, the one in particular used by Christopher Penczak, which divides the mind into the conscious mind, once again, but this time the psychic mind and the divine mind. Now, what we do know about all these different systems is that the state that we are trying to achieve in our rituals is one where we bring all three of those minds into alignment. Now, this is easier said than done, and some of you may find this quite easy, and some of you may have no idea what to do. That's what this whole episode is going to be about. But what all those systems always do share in common is bringing those minds into alignment. So essentially, our mind is composed of energy. Just like anything else out in the universe, this energy is made up of wave patterns, and we can learn how to change those brain wave patterns. We can learn how to enter different states of consciousness. So we don't want to be up in that conscious mind when we're in ritual. We want to get down into an altered state. Now, in order to learn how to change these patterns, we have to know, first of all, what they are. So we're just going to start with a little science lesson that is very brief, and I'm going to teach it in a way that's easy to understand. We're just going to talk about the different brain waves because we're really trying to achieve one state, and most of the time we're in a different state than the one we're trying to achieve during magic. So like all things, we can manipulate this energy, just like any energy out in the universe, we can and manipulate this energy of our own minds. Now, it takes the form of waves, and most of the time, I'm just saying hi to Tanessa and Misty here with me tonight. So most of the time, we are going to find ourselves in a beta state of consciousness. But we can learn to change that if we'd like. Okay, so now when we're in beta, we are in this alert kind of state of mind. We are consciously awake. We are aware of what's going on around us. Our brain is going to be cycling at 13 to about 30 cycles per second. We say hertz is the standard unit that we use to measure that. But what's really important to us as witches is during this time we're kind of in our day-to-day existence. Now, it's a necessary state for us to be in. We can't always be in some trance-like state when we're going through our regular lives, right? So most of our waking life is going to be spent in this beta state. But it's not conducive for magic at all. So it's just like in the last episode last week, we talked about that conscious mind. It's not really great for our magic or for our spell work or for our rituals. Now, if you've ever had trouble getting into a ritual or really feeling like you were able to focus on it, you may have felt that before. Probably what's going on is you're just not able to get out of that beta state. So as a high priestess, I've run many rituals. I do stuff online now as well, but I also do stuff in person. And for years, all we did was in person. And so I've watched many people come to rituals, and there'd be some people who just couldn't get into that space. And what I would notice is there be certain things like perhaps drinking way too much coffee before coming to the ritual, or having too much alcohol, or being too flustered by what has happened during the day, just not able to calm their minds. And so for these people, they're stuck in that beta space. They can't get out. But what we want to achieve is the alpha state. The alpha state is below the beta state. This is our state of physical and mental relaxation. Now here, we are aware of what's going on around us, so we're not in a trance of any kind, but we are super relaxed, and which means we're going to be more receptive to information that's coming in. Now, sometimes we call this the daydream state. So if you are in regular waking life and you're in your beta state and then you find yourself falling into that daydreamy state, that is you in alpha. And so if you can kind of remember what that felt like, that's the state we're trying to achieve in our spiritual and magical practices. Now, in this state, our brain is cycling at about 8 to 12 cycles per second, or 8 to 12 hertz. And here we can perform magic, we can do our rituals, our spells, our meditation, and this is the level that most of the time we're trying to achieve. We're more receptive, we're more creative, and we're most able to visualize as well. Now, below the alpha state, there is a second state that is quite important to witches, especially if we want to get into more of a trance-like state. So this is theta. Theta is a state of light sleep. And in this state, you might say this is like the hypnagogic state. So if you have ever been lying in bed, and you find yourself sort of in that space between being awake and being asleep, and you kind of drift off, but then you get kind of jolted out of it, you are jolted out of that hypnagogic state. So there your brainwaves were in theta, and when you get jolted out, most likely it put you back up into beta. So now you're awake again. Now, in this state, we can enter this when we're in deep, deep meditation, and perhaps a deep meditation like yoga nidra, which despite its name does not contain movement like we kind of think of in the West yoga is, but it is a deep, deep, deep state of meditation. So that will help us get into theta trance. If you've ever been led into a trance-like state, it is just slightly below alpha. This is 4 to 7 cycles per second, or 4 to 7 hertz. So it's just slightly below. Now, in that state, you're going to be even more receptive. So sometimes people want to get into that, especially if they're at home. Like you don't really want to probably be in trance when you're out in public doing a ritual or something. But if you're in your own space and someone's kind of leading you into it, it's great. It's much easier to connect to the divine when you're in that space. Now, below theta, we have delta. So delta is really not going to do us much good in ritual because we'll be asleep. But it can do us great good, for our healing, for our connecting to the divine and the spirit world and our dearly departed loved ones through our dreams. So our delta state is when we are unconscious. So here we're in a deep sleep or we're in a coma. And this is where the brain is cycling at 0.1 to 3 cycles per second, 0.1 to 3 hertz. Now, I do want to mention another state that's very interesting, and people are only now really talking about it more. I think it needs to be explored more, but there is a state called gamma. Now, gamma is above all of the other states. So this is actually above beta, where you're at waking state. So remember, beta goes up to 30 cycles per second. So once we reach above 30, we enter this state called gamma. Here we are highly alert, and we are really focused on learning and processing information. So if you find a flow state and you're out in the waking world, chances are you're not actually in alpha, you're more like you're in gamma. Now here, sometimes it's been reported that people's brains can go all the way up to 1,000 cycles per second while in gamma. Now, we will usually enter this state only for brief amounts of time. So perhaps like an insight, if you have had cosmic downloads where large amounts of information enter your brain at one time, aha moments where all of a sudden you discover something that has puzzled you for a long time, and all of a sudden the answer is just there in front of you. This is likely you received it through your brain entering gamma for that brief moment for that information to come in. This is also a moment of expanded consciousness. If you have ever done Kundalini work where you have had a Kundalini awakening, you are definitely in gamma. The brain opens up. There's no real way to tell the difference between you and what's outside of you. You become one with the universe. And I also believe that this is what happens when we truly can kind of connect to our intuition. So it's a very interesting state. It's not really the one that we're going to talk about today. We're going to spend most of the time talking about alpha because that's the usual state we want to achieve during ritual. But gamma is a very interesting state, and it's going to be exciting when we see more research coming out in the future about it. So during our rituals, our magic, our spell work, we are aiming for that alpha state, like I said. Sometimes you will want to go all the way down into theta if you're going to go into trance, but otherwise we're aiming for that alpha. And we are aiming for just a little bit below the waking state. That's really all we need. So this means we need to learn how to slow down the system, which means that we will slow down our brain waves a little bit. We just need to slow it down just a little bit. Now, studies show that a regular meditation practice can very much help people enter alpha state at will. So I will tell you, I've been practicing meditation for years and years and years. And at this point, I can confidently say that when I close my eyes, it takes me about a few seconds and I can achieve alpha right away. That didn't happen in the beginning. It took a lot of time to get there. Now, this meditation we're talking about can be any kind. So sometimes people don't like meditation or say they can't do meditation, and it often means they haven't found the right kind of meditation. It's kind of like exercise. People say, I hate exercise. Well, you're going to hate exercise until you find the one that you really like. Now, with meditation, I'm going to preface this with, I'm going to do an entire episode on meditation and all the different techniques in 2 weeks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But briefly, I'm going to say there are more than one kind. So sometimes when we think about meditation, we think about just closing our eyes and just sitting there, and people say, I can't do this. It's true. It may not be conducive, or it may not resonate well with your brain chemistry or your life or just whatever's going on around you. But there are different ways to do meditation. So we do have that classic guided meditation where you close your eyes, you listen to a recording of someone kind of taking you through a journey. We do have Zen meditation, which is that first kind of talked about, just kind of closing your eyes and letting the mind go blank. But there are other kinds of meditation. There's mindfulness meditation. There is movement meditation. There is walking meditation. There is fire meditation. So there's all these different kinds. And so when I say studies show that meditation helps people achieve that alpha state quickly, I don't mean just one kind, I mean any of these kinds. Okay, so if you're interested in that, definitely you're going to want to check out that episode in 2 weeks. But I will say, actually, I meant to say this too, is if you've never got an Insight timer, it is a nice app. Most of the stuff is on there for free. You can get a subscription to it that's pretty low cost, but a good portion of it's free. And it has different options. So you can listen to guided meditations. There's so many people on there. Find someone you like their voice and just try it out. It also has a timer on there where you can play background music and just set it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just close your eyes and see what happens. Again, like I said, though, I'll talk more about the meditation in 2 weeks, but I did want to mention that for anybody who hasn't tried Insight Timer, highly download it, recommend downloading it and playing around with it, see what happens. All right, so why do we want to enter alpha? Well, our alpha state is where our brain waves have become lower. We have increased our beta endorphins, our norepinephrine, our dopamine, which we know dopamine is can be connected to spiritual and ritual experiences. When we're in alpha, we have our mind has more capacity to find clarity within it. We have heightened creativity. We have increased brain function. All this together makes this the perfect state for our spiritual workings. Now, alpha can feel a lot like beta, because remember I said earlier I can probably close my eyes and be in alpha in a couple of seconds. It feels very similar. So sometimes people don't actually realize they've achieved it. But as you learn to drop into it, you are going to notice what it feels like versus your beta waking state. And as you start to feel that subtle difference, you're going to know if you're in it or not. Now, how do we enter alpha? Well, there are a lot of different ways, and sometimes this entering of alpha is called the path to gnosis. It could sometimes be called ritual consciousness. I will use that a lot in ritual spaces, like we're trying to drop into our ritual consciousness. Now, there's many ways to do this. This 8 that I'm going to talk about is not exhaustive. There are many, many ways, and you may have some that I'm not going to talk about today. They're on my list, and so I'd love to hear it if you have other ways. But I'm going to talk about 8 of the main ones. Now, some of these methods are inhibitory, which means they bring down the system, and some of them are exhibitory, which means they either excite the system or they kind of move it in that opposite direction. There's something going on outside. Now, it doesn't really matter which way we get in, which is what I said in the beginning. It's important that you know and you kind of discover the way that's going to work for you, because not all 8 of these ways are going to be of any interest to you, and some of them might be downright just won't work. So we are going to start with meditation. So meditation is probably one of the most common ways that people get into this altered state. Meditation is inhibitory. It means it's bringing down the system. There really isn't meditation that's exhibitory usually. Our mind is cleared in some cases so that we reach a relaxed state, but I will point out that from an Eastern perspective, it's really, you'll see it more being about clearing the mind, as opposed to in the West, where most of us who are watching this probably live. We tend to use more of guided meditation, but you could try either. And like I said, in 2 weeks, I'm going to expand on that some more. So I'm going to skip ahead then to breath control. Now, breath control can be inhibitory or exhibitory depending on the type of breath that you use. So oftentimes people will pair this with meditation, but it can be done completely separately. In the inhibitory form, you slow the breath down enough that you achieve alpha. Like I said, you could kind of just achieve it within a couple of breaths if you close your eyes. Now, one thing that's really good here is if you can breathe in such a way that your exhale is longer than your inhale, this immediately brings down the central nervous system. So one good method is a counting method to ensure you know that the exhale is longer. So what you could try is breathing in for a count of 3 or 4, and then exhaling for a count of 6 to 8. And you could play around with those numbers. That is not a prescribed number that everybody has to do. You could just play around. But what you want to make sure you're doing is getting that exhale longer than the inhale if you're going to do this inhibitory breath work to get into alpha. Now, the second type of breath that you can use here to get into alpha is like exhibitory. This is instead, it's a fast breath work pattern. So here, breath of fire is a very good one. Breath of fire is pretty easy to do. And if you kind of imagine there's 2 different ways to think about it, is like fogging up a mirror. So like that kind of motion of fogging up a mirror, or think about a dog panting. If you just even make yourself pant, like, and then put your hand on your belly and then eventually close your mouth, and that is breath of fire. So this is a very activating breath. It would be considered exhibitory. And I will add that I have found both breaths to be equally useful. One gets you into alpha takes you down kind of gently, and one kind of gets you there, kind of jars you and gets you there with that activating breath. But I think if you add in breath suspension somewhere in there, it can be even more powerful. So this is where you're doing a breath pattern and then you hold your breath for a period of time. So perhaps you're holding it for 6 or 8 counts. And this can be very, very useful for getting you into an altered state. Now, another form or method that can get you into an altered state is isolation. So, isolation is, there's actually many ways that you can do this, and they all look quite a bit different. So, I'm gonna give you some ideas. So, I will say though, so this is inhibitory, and I will say that you should use caution with this. And I'm going to tell you a story at the end of this little part, and you'll see why you should use some caution. So here you can use silence or fasting, and you could use both at the same time. And this is often used together. What this does is it begins to alter the brain chemistry. So there is something called Vipassana meditation, and you can Google it. You can find centers around. I found one actually near Joshua Tree. I live in California, but there are centers around where you can go there and you can do something like this, where you enter this place and you don't talk, so it's all silent. So I have not done that, but when I was in my first yoga teacher training, we did a day where it was complete silence. So there was this agreement made that the night before, when we went to bed, the last thing that was going to basically signal us, or that we were going to communicate with the outside world with, was an alarm that would get us up. So they even told us, if you don't know how to get to the center by now where the training's taking place, make sure you put the directions into Google Maps and read it the night before so you know how to get there. So anyway, everybody gets there. There's no talking. And not only is there no talking, there's no eye contact either, because it's supposed to be completely isolation. So the only thing, it's not, you're around this group of people, but the thing that was very strange about it, that became very evident quickly, is that it's felt like you were a ghost, like you were dead, like everyone was walking past you, looking through you. But it was very powerful, and even within only about, I think we did this practice for about 6 hours or so before we came out of this state of silence, I noticed that my perception, my awareness was heightened. I could hear the birds outside in a way I had never heard them. We did not fast during the time, but the food I would eat tasted richer than I had ever tasted food. The sky looked bigger than I'd ever seen it before. So it really expands your perception and your awareness. And when I came out of it, I had a mind-blowing experience when my third eye, basically, the teacher said, pull back the veils. And the veils pulled back, and I basically saw through the veils. And it was an amazing and moving experience. But I will say, why I say to use caution, is that there was a girl who was there, and there was something in it that triggered her in such a way, she actually ended up having to leave the training for the rest of the time. She couldn't come back. And I think she had a lot of unprocessed trauma, maybe, or something that hadn't been dealt with, and it just triggered it there. And she didn't have the capacity to bring herself back out of it on her own. So I just say use caution, but it is a very, very powerful technique to get you into an altered state. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is intoxication. And again, this one is going to be another one we want to use a lot of caution with. And when I say intoxication, this may not be quite what you think it is. It can be inhibitory or exhibitory depending on the substance that's being used, and should be used with guidance and training. So this altered state can be achieved through ritual wines. It can be achieved through tinctures made of specific herbal combinations, light hallucinogenics, or just simple incense actually can do it for some people as well. So there are certain herbs like mugwort that can be highly bring you into this altered state. The key here is to find just enough. And I will say with that mugwort, you can actually get mugwort incense, or almost like a smudge stick as well, to help you if you want to try that. It does not have to be ingested, though it can be. But again, you want to use caution with any of this. You want to find, just enough. I would make sure I do some research before you do anything like this. If you can find that sweet spot, it can open up a doorway into your unconscious, into your psychic and divine minds. But obviously, the moderation is going to be the key, because using too much is going to send you past that state. We don't want to go past that state. So, and also we want to be careful if you have any substance abuse issues like that, then you want to use extra caution here. Okay. But this is one I would definitely, if you're interested, I would Google it, get some more information, and see if this one works for you. So the next one is sound, and with sound, we may find this to be inhibitory or exhibitory. It really depends on the type of music or the type of sound that's being used. So the sound can be sound that is happening outside of you, or it can be sound that you produce yourself. So singing, chanting, mantras, which are not the same as chanting. So mantras are special words that are put together in a certain way that alter consciousness, that kind of change the energy in the body. Seed sounds are similar to that, but they're isolated sounds, so it's one syllable. They can literally be intoned, and it can change the energy in the body and the energy in the mind. Drumming, trance-like music, any kind of music that you respond to can bring you into the altered state. So some people are going to respond to music that is more like excitatory, right? It's louder, it's faster. And some people are going to respond to slower and quieter music. So I was on a call with someone who does shamanism yesterday, and he was leading people through a kind of trying to bring people into an alpha state through drumming, and his drumming was so fast. And I know it worked for other people because the host of the show that he was doing had a incredible experience that he talked about, but for me, I couldn't get into it at all. The drumming was just too fast. So here it's really important for each person to find their taste and their preference when it comes to using sound. And you may find that you can get swept away by the music, and if so, then you're on your way there. Another method we can use is body movement. This is going to be exhibitory because we're moving rather than during the meditation where we're generally going to be kind of still. Here we're going to be moving. So this can be dancing. It can be intuitive movement. If you've never tried intuitive movement, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is it's really good for your sacral chakra, and you find music that you really respond to, turn it on, close the door, get someplace where you won't be interrupted or embarrassed about anything. Close your eyes and just really let your body move in the way it wants to move, and just really listen to it. Don't listen with your mind. Listen with your body. Let your body guide you. Like, it will actually start to move in the way it wants to move, and it will show you some very important things about it. Another way to achieve alpha would be running or walking. So if you really like that, or biking. When I was in high school, I used to carry a little notepad in the hem of my running shorts, and I would run or I would bike as I was training. I was a soccer player, and I was always training. And so I would keep this little notebook there because inevitably when I would go running or I would go biking, I would get so many ideas. I'm also a songwriter, and so these songs would come down to me, lyrics, and first couple of times I learned after the first couple of times that I needed to bring a pen and something to write with, or I was going to lose all my ideas because they would just come through to me that way. I've also found other repetitive things like cleaning the house. Like when I vacuum, I find I enter into a altered state, and I get so many ideas. Like I have to constantly turn the vacuum off and run to a piece of paper and write them down. And so if you can find something, this repetitive movement that kind of can bring you into that state, if you can then somehow replicate that prior to your magical working, your ritual, whatever you're doing, it can help you, achieve that state. Other movements could be kundalini, kriyas. So these are special repetitive movements that are known, like the seed sounds, to change the energy of the body. but really anything with repetitive movement that you enjoy will work here. Now, this next method is not going to be for everybody, but some people actually find this is really works for them. So sex can be a way to achieve an altered state. So this is definitely exhibitory. It can be alone or with a partner, and great amounts of energy can be raised during sex. So, especially if you are trained, if you practice tantra or you're trained in Kundalini energy, it can be add like kind of extra oomph to it. But it is just a method to consider. And this other one, this final one I'm going to talk about tonight, again, is not really, this is not my go-to. I've never personally used it before, though I do have a connection to it a bit. But this would be the use of pain. So we do need to use some caution here. It is exhibitory, and people can achieve an altered state through certain forms of pain. So if you've ever been pierced or tattooed before, I have a lot of tattoos and several piercings, and if you're like that, you've probably realized that there is a slightly addictive, maybe more than slightly for some people, but there's an addictive response to the tattooing and the piercing. And it is because it releases endorphins, it changes the chemistry of the brain, especially a tattoo, which is much longer than the piercing, the time length that it takes to get it done, could really send you into this altered state. And there are also, I should mention, because there are people who do this, there is scourging, which is like a light ritual whipping that people will use because it helps send them into that altered state, and that's their preferred method. So again, like some of these ones, like isolation and these different substances, intoxication, you definitely want to use some caution with this. Now, one thing is that we can use a combination of all of these. So for example, we could use meditation combined with breath control, combined with some drumming, and combined with incense. That would be like one combination. So you can put these in different combinations in order to help you find the way that works best for you. Now, if you're having trouble achieving an altered state, I recommend trying repetition. Pick something from this list, one or two things from this list. At least for a while, just do those things. So for example, always use the same incense during ritual. Always listen to the same music. Wear the same clothes and the same jewelry only for your ritual. So you don't have to do this forever, but if you are having trouble, or if you really do just want to like, I did this for a while and it really heightens the ritual response, because what happens is that it teaches your mind what to expect when you put that clothing on, when you put that jewelry on, when you light that exact same incense and listen to that same music. It teaches the mind what to expect, and you're much more likely to achieve that altered state. So I wasn't even particularly having trouble achieving the altered state. I just wanted to see what would happen if I did that. And I will tell you, it very, very much heightened my ability to get into that altered state. So definitely worth trying. Now I think I got a couple questions here in the chat. So I'm just going to look at those for a second. And I see Misty says she always does better with listening to meditation music with no voice. Yeah, so some people do not really like that guided part where the voice is going. So if you know that you're someone like that, you definitely want to find recordings that don't have that voice. And I like what she says here. She says nature sounds and subliminals. Subliminals are incredible, because you can't hear what's being said, but underneath it, your brain is still processing that. And yeah, I agree. It's a very amazing thing to try. And then Tanessa said, any ideas of making yourself sleepy? She has really bad insomnia. So with insomnia, it's a tough one. Everybody's insomnia is usually coming from a different, it has a different cause. So in my own experience, I've lived having very bad insomnia for much of my life. I realize now I am a night person. It was worth my time arranging my life in such a way that I could continue to be that night person. I don't take a job where I have to be there at 9 or 10 in the morning anymore. I'm able to do that. It just became a decision that I had to make. And I remember actually listening to someone who she was like, I just don't start working until 12. And I remember I used to think, man, you're so lucky. I wish I could do that. And then I was just like, why not figure out a way to make my life in that way? Not everybody can, but if you're able to, and that just you're somebody who's up at night and that's just how your life is, or that's how you've always been, it is worth considering. But sometimes people aren't a night person. They're actually a day person, but they just can't sleep. So one technique that I really like a lot because it's so simple is double nostril breathing is really good. But for sleeping, single nostril breathing through the left nostril. So you just have to close off the right nostril, and then you're just going to breathe in and out through the left nostril. You can do it while you're laying in bed. And the left channel of our body, the left energetic channel of our body, is the feminine channel, which has nothing to do with gender of any kind. It's just simply the word for this type of energy, but it is an energy that brings the system down. It's more receiving, it's more receptive. So alternatively, if somebody wants to pep themselves up, then I would say close off the left nostril and then breathe in and out through the right, and that's going to activate the system. So that's one thing to try. Yoga Nidra, hands down, if you haven't tried it before, I can't rave about it enough. It is not, despite what it says, it is not the yoga that we typically think about in the Western world. There's no movement usually. It's just a meditation, a special type of meditation that brings people into a very altered state. So it brings you down and relaxes you very easily. So one thing about Yoga Nidra is they say that a 30-minute session of Yoga Nidra is equivalent to about 4 hours of sleep, 2 to 4 hours of sleep, even if you don't sleep. So sometimes you won't fall asleep during the Yoga Nidra. Even if you don't, it's like equivalent to 4 hours of sleep. So I have used that when I can't sleep and there's panic because I know I have to get up in the morning. I try the Yoga Nidra because I know at least I'm going to get some kind of rest. But some people find that Yoga Nidra drops them right down into sleep immediately. It can be a game changer for many people. So that insight timer I was talking about earlier, you can get a lot of Yoga Nidras on there for free, or YouTube. If you're in my membership, which I know Tanessa's not, but Misty is, we are going to do a whole Yoga Nidra module in there. So anybody who's really interested in that, you can think about joining the membership when we reopen at the end of February. Outside of that, other things to help you sleep, I would say to get off, if you're not getting off the computer or a lot of lights around you, just see if you can do that a couple hours before bedtime. And I had a great response to taking internal lavender oil. It was prescribed by my naturopath, and it was really a big game changer. They gave me that a lot. Like, nothing had ever worked for me. None of the sleep aids or supplements that people talk about. That one really worked for me, as well as theanine, which is a amino acid, and you can buy it pretty much anywhere. They sell it. I saw it at CVS. I've seen it at CVS before, but you can also order it online. So those would be some thoughts for you. I'd see if any of those work, but I feel for you because I know that terrible, terrible insomnia and how it can make life really kind of hellish, right, when we can't sleep. All right, so I don't see any other questions here. If you're watching this back later and you think of something, please put it in the chat. I'll make sure I answer it either in the feed or I'll answer it at next week's episode. And speaking of next week, because we have the dark moon arriving at the end of next week, our episode next week is all going to be about some of my best shadow work tips. So we'll be talking about that. And then in 2 weeks, we'll dive deep into all those different meditations and different meditative methods. And we'll see if there's any that you enjoy that you've never even heard of before. All right, I'm going to sign off for now. But until next time, blessed be.